Bang! Hukum stormed out of the door. It was quiet inside the Red Tree Pagoda. The Red Tree Pagoda is usually quiet. It's because the owner of the tower, Yelmaka, didn't like noise. But the suffocating stillness that now surrounds the Red Tree Pagoda cannot be explained by saying that it's because of the mere silence. There is no warmth, not even the faint sound of breathing. There is only the chilling cold air that made the skin of Hukum feel goosebumps. Hukum stared at the hallway. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see anything. An ominous premonition overcame him. After hesitating for a moment, Hukum carefully opened the door to the next room. It was the room where one of the warriors of the Red Tree Pagoda lived. Huk. As soon as he opened the door and checked the inside, a suppressed gasp escaped from Hukum's mouth. A mighty warrior stood tall and stared at him. He looked as if was dealing with life or death. "Oh, sorry." Hukum, who inadvertently apologized, shut his mouth. He didn't feel vitality of the living from the warrior. "No way?" Hukum cautiously approached the man. There was still no movement from the warrior. "Ah." Hukum finally arrived in front of the warrior and let out the breath he had been holding back without realizing it. As he had guessed, the warrior had already stopped breathing. But the warrior's standing posture and the staring expression were so vivid that it made it seem that he was still alive. The warrior, who had lost his breath, was a master who was recognized in the Red Tree Pagoda. Even though such a master died in the room next to him, Hukum did not feel any signs. He felt chills as if he had the flu. Hukum looked at the body of the dead warrior without fear. He couldn't find any scars. A strong man had died near him, and the fact that he did not know how he died made Hukum sick to his stomach. "It's him. He's hiding in here." Hukum ran out of the room. Hukum, who looked around for a while, soon ran into another room. The owner of the room was a person who looked like an ordinary scholar. He died while reading a book in front of his desk. And again, no wounds were found. Ugh. Hukum unconsciously let out a groan. It was difficult to bear the fear rising from the depths of his heart. He has lived his entire life as a fearmonger. His martial arts, which was a combination of his demon eyes, cursed poison, and dream-dispersing drug, was also an object of fear in the Xiaolian temple. Some people were uncomfortable with his martial arts, but that didn't stop his martial arts from being among the best in the Xiaolian temple. Everyone was afraid of Hukum. And Hukum enjoyed the fearful gaze of the people. His inferiority complex, caused by the ugly appearance, was overcome by nourishing the fear of the people. But now, he found himself feeling afraid of another person. His back became stiff, and he had a slight twitch in his shoulders. His stomach complained of extreme pain as if he was about to vomit. Hukum slammed the door and came out. Hukuk. He squatted in the corner of the hallway and vomited up all the food in his stomach. It was not until he had vomited up all the yellow gastric juice that he stood up. Hukum opened all the doors of the Red Tree Pagoda. "They're all dead. Not a single person left." Hukum murmured in disbelief. When he came in yesterday, there were a lot of people in the Red Tree Pagoda, moving in a lively manner. Some of them have honed and practiced their martial arts, while others simply lived their daily lives. Among them, there were those who looked at Hukum with scornful eyes. There were such a variety of people, but not all of them were cold. How? Although Hukum was in a deep sleep, he still mastered and developed his sense of awareness. The fact that he did not notice a lot of people had died maximized his fear. Hukum opened the door leading to Yelmaka's room, which was at the top of the pagoda, with trembling hands. Hukum's eyes widened. Yelmaka was sitting in a chair. The colorful ornaments that she once wore as a substitute for weapons were nowhere to be found. It was clear that Yelmaka ornaments were the same ornaments found on the bed of Hukum. Even though Hukum approached, Yelmaka did not respond. Like everyone else, she was already out of breath. Her wide-eyed eyes and the clenched teeth were still vivid as if she was about to leave her seat at any moment. Hukum noticed the fear in Yelmaka's expression. He doesn't know what happened before she died, but Yelmaka must have felt a terrible fear. Pyo Wool. He already knew who their killer was. Pyo Wool was the only one who persistently pursued and harassed him from Chengdu. Pyo Wool was a cruel hunter. He has been slowly constricting the breath of Hukum like a snare. He never rushed, nor did he ever show up. So even up to this point, Hukum had never seen Pyo Wool's face. Pyo Wool has been tightening the noose around Hukum, while hiding himself like a ghost. Even the Red Tree Pagoda, which Hukum believed in, could not stop him. Since the Red Tree Pagoda already collapsed, there was no other place nearby which could protect Hukum. There was only one place left. The only way he can survive is to go to the Xiaolian temple. Hukum did not want to die. He had killed countless people until now, but he didn't want to be hit with a meaningless death like the warriors in the Red Tree Pagoda. He wanted to be remembered as a fearsome creature until the very end. He didn't want to be forgotten as someone who lost his life in vain at the hands of an assassin. Hukum hurriedly ran out of Yelmaka's room. The brief moment he took to go from the 7th floor to the 1st floor extremely frightened him. He felt as if a blade would come out of nowhere and cut his own throat at any moment. It looked as if a blade would come out of his back and cut his own throat at any moment. Hukum came down to the 1st floor, unable to even breathe properly due to the extreme fear. Bang! He threw himself and broke the door on the 1st floor of the Red Tree Pagoda and came out. As he stepped out of the tower, the dazzling sunlight poured down like a waterfall, irritating his eyes. Huff! Huff! Hukum didn't think about his eyes. He just fell on the floor and exhaled a rough breath. That was then. Cit. A fine sound echoed, and Hukum felt a sharp pain in his forearm. A dagger that flew from somewhere grazed his forearm and then landed on the floor. His forearms was cut, and blood flowed out. It was Pyo Wool. Cook! Hukum clenched its teeth and stood up. Pyo Wool no longer allowed him to rest. If he doesn't want to die, he will be pressured to move until the end. It was a situation that he got used to, but that didn't alleviate even his fear. He had to continue moving if he didn't want to be hurt even further. Hukum started to move forward. Pyo Wool looked at the back of Hukum with eyes that did not contain emotion. He didn't feel sorry for Hukum Evson if he trudged along with his droopy shoulders. It wasn't because Pyo Wool lost his humanity that he didn't feel guilty about pushing a human being into an extreme situation. It was just that Pyo Wool was well aware of how foolish it would be if he would show mercy or compassion against his opponent in a fight for survival. It was a life-or-death battle. He had to use every means he could. Placing psychological pressure on his opponent so that they could not think about anything else is one of the efficient ways of pursuing his goal. It was also an effective means to put psychological pressure on him so that he could not think about anything else. In order to drive Hukum into an extreme situation, Pyo Wool killed all the warriors of the Red Tree Pagoda. The Red Tree Pagoda that split from the Xiaolian temple was by no means an inexperienced or weak sect. This chapter was originally shared via N0vel bin. They used the isolated environment of the tower as a shield. But their confidence that no one would dare to penetrate into the tower became one of their weaknesses. While the isolated environment made it difficult to infiltrate the pagoda, simultaneously once an enemy got inside, it was also impossible for the members to find a way out. They believed in the security of the tower, but that could not stop the invasion of the Pyo Wool. Pyo Wool secretly hid in the Red Tree Pagoda at night when they were all asleep, and proceeded to find and kill each one of them. No one noticed the intrusion of Pyo Wool. Pyo Wool was the god of death. He equally punished and killed all the warriors of the Red Tree Pagoda. Even Yelmaka, the owner of the Red Tree Pagoda, could not escape his punishment. Still, he was better than the other warriors. Because he had at least seen Pyo Wool's face before he died. But that didn't mean he had a proper fight against him. The tower was a closed and safe space. No one threatened them, nor did anyone challenge its authority. Although the warriors had been training every day, it was nothing but water training to maintain their current physical condition and level. They didn't have a sense of urgency. As a result, their nerves were dulled. That was the biggest reason why Yelmaka had been killed without much resistance. Or maybe it was because Pyowool's assassination had developed that much. Well, the reason was not important. The important thing is that all those who protected Hukum disappeared. Until now, Hukum had been doing his best in finding helpers to shake off Pyowool. But now his movement has changed. He wasn't trying to go anywhere else anymore, he was only moving in a straight line. That could only mean one thing. He's finally heading to the Xiaolialayan temple. There is only one action a person would take when they are cornered with nowhere to escape. It is to move desperately towards where you think you're safest. The safest place for Hukum was the Xiaolialayan temple. The Xiaolialayan temple was his everything. Sect leader Hyalbul was there, as well as the other monks such as the 10 monks of the Blood Thunder. Furthermore, there were also those who studied only the simple martial arts, and there were those who practiced poisons that other people could not even imagine. Above all, the results of Hukum's research was in the Xiaolialayan temple. He believed that if he used the result of his research, he would surely be able to kill Pyowool. Although Pyowool did not know Hukum's inner thoughts, he could feel that he had something in mind. Pyowool didn't leave any more traces after saving Wan Jiayang. He had no more need for Jin Jianwu. Pyowool thought that once Jin Jianwu saved Wan Jiayang, he would return back to Chengdu. No matter how strong a person is, once they get past the difficulties they are experiencing, they will no longer care about other people's affairs. Because Pyowool knew the attributes of such people well, he thought that Jin Jianwu would not be able to escape from belonging to that category either, so he stopped thinking about him and left no traces. Pyowool matched his footsteps with Hukum using synchronization. If Hukum would walk fast, Pyowool would also walk fast, and if the speed of Hukum slows down, Pyowool would adjust accordingly. Hukum was also well aware that Pyowool is still chasing him. But knowing that he couldn't shake him off, he just gave up and walked forward. It was a very bizarre sight. Hukum did not see Pyowool's face even once, but other people such as herdsmen who were staying on the plains clearly saw Pyowool's appearance. Hukum exhaled a rough breath as he moved with difficulty. Pyowool was still following behind him like a ghost. The distance between Hukum and Pyowool was only about 10 steps. Nevertheless, Hukum never saw Pyowool's face. Hukum was tired of the pressure coming from Pyowool, so he was having difficulty moving forward. His eyes were already hazy. He was just a step closer from succumbing to the pressure. He was barely holding himself together. There were only two thoughts in Hukum's head. One was the Xiaolialayan temple, and the other was Pyowool. He couldn't think of anything else. That's what Pyowool is forcing him to do. Thus, the spirit of Hukum was exhausted day by day. Pyowool allowed Hukum to rest, but only barely enough for him to keep his breath. It was a kind of torture. A sophisticated torture that thoroughly destroys the body and mind. Without touching him, Pyowool completely destroyed Hukum. Huff. Huff. At some point, the eyes of Hukum regained vitality. Because there was a huge forest in the distance. A huge forest, covered with thick fog all year round. Because it was dark even in broad daylight, it was a forest that ordinary people would not even dare to enter because of their fear. People called it Namling Forest. 1. That was the final destination of Hukum. Finally. For the first time, a feeling of joy appeared on the face of Hukum. His final destination existed in Namling Forest. The Xiaolialayan Temple. 2. The legendary sect that rules Zizang.